Engineer First Class David Torres had learned during 3 years working in Thessari facilities that the key to professional success was being useful, competent, and as invisible as possible during formal court sessions. Today was testing that third requirement in uncomfortable ways. He stood with 11 other human maintenance workers along the back wall of the Grand Assembly Hall, trying to blend into the crystalline architecture, while Queen Isaveth's court conducted official business that had absolutely nothing to do with environmental system maintenance. They were here because they'd been inside the hall's ventilation infrastructure when the court session began. And Thessari protocol absolutely forbade anyone entering or exiting the chamber once formal proceedings started. So they were stuck, 12 humans in work coveralls marked with grease stains and coolant residue, standing as unobtrusively as possible while Thessari nobles discussed administrative matters in their flowing formal language. The Thessari Empire had been hosting human workers for 5 years under the Technology Exchange Agreement. Humans provided maintenance and engineering expertise for Thessari systems in exchange for access to advanced technologies that Earth desperately wanted to study and adapt. It was mutually beneficial arrangement that worked as long as humans remembered their place in the hierarchy, which was useful but not important, present but not visible, competent with machinery but not relevant to political or administrative decisions. David had navigated this dynamic successfully for 3 years. He knew the environmental systems in the Royal District better than most Thessari facility managers. He could diagnose problems by sound and vibration that others needed diagnostic equipment to detect. He'd prevented half a dozen potential system failures through careful maintenance and proactive repairs, none of which made him anything other than a foreign worker doing a job that Thessari engineers could probably do themselves if they wanted to invest the time in training. The Grand Assembly Hall was impressive even when you'd seen it dozens of times. Crystalline walls that seemed to grow organically from the floor, reaching up to a ceiling so high it created its own weather patterns. Bioluminescent panels providing soft blue-green light that made Thessari skin tones look particularly beautiful. Acoustic engineering so perfect that whispers carried clearly from one end of the enormous space to the other. David knew the hall's infrastructure intimately. He'd spent weeks inside the environmental control systems, the atmospheric processors, the temperature regulation network that kept the space comfortable for Thessari physiology. He knew where every maintenance access point was located, which systems had redundancy, where the emergency overrides were positioned. But knowing the infrastructure didn't make standing through a 3-hour administrative review any less tedious. Queen Isaveth was currently confirming budget allocations for various departments. Her voice carried across the hall with the clarity that perfect acoustics provided, each word reaching even the back wall where the human workers stood trying not to shift their weight too obviously. David's second-in-command, Martinez, caught his eye and made a subtle gesture that conveyed boredom mixed with resignation. They had at least another hour before the session would conclude, and they'd be allowed to return to their actual work. David nodded acknowledgement and returned his attention to the proceedings, letting the formal Thessari wash over him without trying to follow every detail. His translator implant provided rough meaning, but the formal court language was complex enough that he only caught about 70% of the nuance. Then he felt it, a subtle vibration in the floor that shouldn't be there. Not dramatic, not obvious, just wrong in a way that 3 years of working with Thessari environmental systems had trained him to recognize instantly. He glanced at Martinez, who'd also noticed. They exchanged looks that communicated professional concern without words. David quietly pulled his diagnostic scanner from his tool belt. It was disguised to look like a standard data pad, less conspicuous during moments like this, when pulling out obvious maintenance equipment might draw unwanted attention. He ran a quick diagnostic sweep of the hall's environmental systems, focusing on the atmospheric processors that kept air quality at appropriate levels for 300 Thessari and 12 humans. What the scanner showed him made his blood run cold. The main atmospheric processor was showing stress indicators that suggested imminent cascade failure. Not minor malfunction that would make the air stuffy. Complete failure that would cause rapid oxygen depletion in a sealed chamber. The backup systems should prevent catastrophe. That's what redundancy was for. But David's scanner showed the backup processor was already offline. Had been for at least 6 hours based on the error logs, which meant someone had failed to notice or report a critical fault during routine maintenance checks. The safety system that was supposed to prevent exactly this scenario, main processor failure with backup already down, wasn't functioning because the backup wasn't actually backing up anything. If the main processor failed, everyone in this chamber had maybe 15 minutes before oxygen levels dropped to dangerous levels. Maybe 20 if people stayed calm and didn't panic breathe. David did rapid mental calculation about proper procedures versus practical reality. Option 1. Report through official channels. Notify the Thessari facility supervisor, who would notify Royal Guard, who would notify court officials, who would decide whether to interrupt the Queen's session. That chain took minimum 10 minutes on a good day, probably 15 with Thessari bureaucratic protocols. By the time warning reached the Queen, they'd be 5 minutes from crisis. Option 2. Interrupt the session directly. Violate every protocol of court procedure. Risk disciplinary action, possible deportation, definite career consequences, but get immediate evacuation that might actually save lives. Option 3. Try to repair the failing processor while the session continued. David knew the systems well enough that he might be able to stabilize the main unit and restore the backup before cascade failure occurred. Maybe, if nothing went wrong. If the failure wasn't more extensive than his scanner indicated. If he was lucky and skilled and very, very fast. He made a decision based on 3 years of experience and his professional assessment of acceptable risk. He was going to try the repair. He signaled to Martinez and the crew using hand signs they developed for communicating in loud or formal environments. Martinez's eyes went wide when David indicated the nature and urgency of the problem, but he nodded understanding. The crew began quietly gathering tools and moving toward the maintenance exits. They could access the processor room through service corridors without technically entering or leaving the hall, so they wouldn't violate protocol about movement during court sessions. David was preparing to follow them when the main atmospheric processor's failure alarm triggered. Not the subtle malfunction he'd been tracking, full catastrophic failure. Every calculation he'd made about available time just became dangerously optimistic. The alarm was loud enough to penetrate even the hall's acoustic engineering. A harsh klaxon that made every Thessari in the chamber turn toward the source of the sound. The court session stopped mid-sentence, Queen Isaveth looking around with an expression of confusion that suggested this had never happened during her reign. David didn't have time for proper procedure anymore. He ran, not toward the maintenance exits where his crew was heading, toward the throne. He was crossing the chamber floor at a dead sprint, still carrying his diagnostic scanner, tool belt jangling, coveralls streaked with evidence of a morning spent inside ventilation shafts cleaning filter assemblies. He was aware that royal guards were moving to intercept him. A human worker running toward the throne was exactly the kind of security threat they were trained to stop. "Evacuate now," David shouted, his voice carrying across the chamber through sheer volume and the hall's perfect acoustics. Atmospheric processor catastrophic failure. Backup system already offline. You have 10 minutes, maybe less, before oxygen depletion becomes critical. The guards were almost on him, but he kept running, kept shouting. "Your Majesty, you need to order immediate evacuation. The main atmospheric processor just went into cascade failure, and the backup has been offline for hours. I can try to repair it, but everyone needs to get out of this chamber right now." He was tackled by a guard 3 meters from the throne platform. Hit the crystalline floor hard enough that he felt something in his shoulder give protest. His diagnostic scanner skittered across the floor. But he'd gotten his message to the Queen, who was standing now, her skin showing alarm white. "Is this accurate?" Queen Isaveth demanded, her voice cutting through the confusion. "Is there immediate danger to everyone in this chamber?" "Yes, Your Majesty," David said from the floor where 2 guards were restraining him. "I've been monitoring the environmental systems. The main atmospheric processor just went into catastrophic cascade failure. The backup system has been offline for at least 6 hours. Someone failed to report a fault during maintenance. Without both systems operational, This chamber will run out of breathable air in approximately 10 minutes, maybe less if people panic and increase their oxygen consumption through elevated breathing. The Queen's skin shifted through rapid colors: assessment blue, decision-making purple, command gold. Evacuate the chamber. Immediate priority. All personnel exit through primary doors. Royal Guard, facilitate orderly evacuation. The guards and court officials moved to comply, beginning the process of moving 300 Thessari toward the exits. But it was going to be slow. The doors were designed for ceremonial processions, not emergency evacuation. "Your Majesty," David said, still restrained on the floor, "I can repair the system. My crew is already moving to access the processor room. But I need authorization to use emergency override protocols, and I need the evacuation to continue, because if I can't get atmospheric processing restored, people will suffocate." Queen Isaveth looked down at him, really looked at him for the first time. Saw a human worker in stained coveralls, held on the floor by guards, speaking with absolute certainty about systems and timing and repair procedures. "You can repair catastrophic processor failure in 10 minutes?" she asked. "I can try," David said honestly. "I know these systems intimately. I've maintained them for 3 years. I've studied the failure modes and repair protocols. I can't guarantee success, but I'm your best chance of restoring atmospheric processing before oxygen depletion becomes a medical emergency." The Queen made a decision that David would later learn was characteristic of her leadership style. She trusted competence over protocol. She raised her hand and pointed directly at David. Every Thessari in the chamber, guards, nobles, officials, everyone stopped and stared, because a direct pointing gesture from the Queen was absolute command that overrode all other authority. "Release him immediately. Give him whatever access and authorization he requires. Clear the maintenance corridors of all non-essential personnel. He has my authority to do whatever is necessary to restore atmospheric safety." The guards released David instantly. When a queen pointed and gave direct command, protocol became irrelevant. David scrambled to his feet, his shoulder protesting but functional. He grabbed his diagnostic scanner from where it had fallen. "Thank you, Your Majesty. Please continue the evacuation. If I can't get systems online in 8 minutes, everyone needs to be completely out of the chamber." He ran toward the maintenance access, guards stepping aside without question because the Queen had commanded it. Behind him, he heard the Queen's voice carrying across the hall. "Continue evacuation. Orderly but rapid. This human has my complete authority to restore safety. Anyone impeding his work will answer to me personally." David didn't pause to appreciate the significance of what had just happened, that a queen had pointed at a maintenance worker and given him authority that superseded nobles and officials and protocol. He just ran toward the processor room, knowing he had maybe 7 minutes to do something that normally took hours under controlled conditions. Martinez and the crew were already in the processor room when David arrived, and the expressions on their faces told him the situation was worse than his initial scan had indicated. "Status," David demanded, moving to the main control panel. The emergency atmospheric system was designed to be simple and robust. In catastrophic scenarios, you needed reliability over sophistication. But it was designed for volumes much smaller than the Grand Assembly Hall. David was essentially going to turn the hall into a manually operated lung, breathing for it until proper atmospheric processors could be restored. "Emergency system activation in 3, 2, 1, now," Martinez called out. The system came online with a sound like a giant inhaling. Massive pumps forcing oxygen-rich air into the chamber through emergency vents that normally only activated during fire suppression. David watched pressure readings on his scanner, manually adjusting flow rates to compensate for the hall's enormous volume. Too much pressure and he'd damage the structure. Too little and people would still suffocate despite the emergency system running. He was threading a needle while the needle was moving and the thread was on fire. "Oxygen levels in the hall are stabilizing," Martinez reported. "But the evacuation is taking too long. People aren't moving fast enough." David made another split-second decision. He activated the emergency pressure vents, designed to equalize pressure during fire events, but also useful for creating directional airflow. The vents opened with a whoosh that increased air circulation and created a pressure differential that gently pushed people toward the exits. Not forcefully enough to knock anyone over, but noticeably enough to speed the evacuation. It also triggered every environmental alarm in the building, creating chaos. But chaos where people could breathe was better than order where they were suffocating. "Last person just exited the hall," Martinez said, monitoring the security feeds. "Chamber is clear." David maintained emergency atmospheric operation for another 3 minutes, giving safety margin for anyone who might have been delayed or missed in the initial count. Then he began carefully throttling down the emergency pumps, managing the pressure transition so he didn't create dangerous differentials. "We need to get the backup processor online before anyone decides to come back in here," David said. "This emergency system isn't designed for sustained operation. We've got maybe 30 minutes of runtime before the pumps overheat." They worked with the focused intensity of professionals who knew lives depended on competent execution. The backup processor had been offline because of improperly restored safety interlocks, a maintenance error that should never have happened but had. Restoring the interlocks required accessing panels behind junction boxes, manually resetting electronic safeties, and verifying system integrity at multiple checkpoints. Under normal circumstances, this was a 3-hour job performed by a full maintenance team with proper planning and documentation. They had 30 minutes and 12 people. David divided the crew into teams, assigned specific tasks, and coordinated the work with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from years of working together. 28 minutes after starting, the backup atmospheric processor came online. It wasn't elegant. There were temporary bypasses and quick fixes that would need proper repair during scheduled maintenance. But it worked. The hall once again had breathable air through normal systems rather than emergency pumps that were never meant for architectural applications. David ran diagnostics to confirm stability, then began the careful process of transitioning from emergency systems back to normal operation. 35 minutes after the main processor had failed, the Grand Assembly Hall was safe again. When David and his crew finally exited the processor room, they found Queen Isaveth waiting in the maintenance corridor. She was surrounded by guards and advisors, but she was there, outside the hall, waiting for confirmation that the crisis had been resolved. "Is it safe?" she asked directly. "Yes, Your Majesty," David replied. "Backup atmospheric processor is online and stable. The hall can be safely reoccupied, but we need to schedule comprehensive repairs for both the main processor and all the safety systems that failed." "This was too close." "How close?" the Queen asked. "If I'd followed proper reporting procedures instead of running toward the throne, people would have started experiencing oxygen deprivation symptoms before evacuation could be completed. Some of the nobles are elderly. They would have been the first to experience medical distress. We would have had casualties." The Queen's skin shifted to contemplative blue. "You prevented tragedy by violating every protocol of court procedure. You ran toward the throne shouting warnings. You allowed yourself to be tackled by guards. You risked disciplinary consequences to ensure the warning was heard immediately. Because proper channels would have taken too long," David said simply. "By the time a warning worked through official protocols, people would have been in medical crisis. I chose the option that saved lives even though it meant violating protocol. And then you repaired systems that your own crew believed were beyond quick repair," the Queen continued. "How did you accomplish that?" "Improvisation and willingness to use emergency systems outside their design parameters," David admitted. "It wasn't elegant or by the book, but it worked well enough to keep everyone alive until proper repairs could be completed. It saved 300 lives," Queen Isaveth corrected, "including mine, including every noble and official in that chamber." She turned to her advisors. "I want this human formally recognized for his actions. He demonstrated competence, decisiveness, and courage that prevented catastrophe. He deserves official acknowledgement." 2 days later, David received a summons to formal audience with the Queen. This time, he wore clean coveralls instead of grease-stained ones, but he was still obviously a worker rather than someone of rank or social status. The Grand Assembly Hall had been fully repaired, both atmospheric processors online, all safety systems restored and verified, redundancies confirmed operational. He entered to find the court assembled, many of the same nobles who'd been present during the near disaster, now watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to grudging respect. Queen Isaveth was on her throne, formal and imposing in her ceremonial robes. When David approached the appropriate distance, she stood. The court murmured in surprise. Queens didn't stand for maintenance workers. "Engineer David Torres," she said formally, her voice carrying across the hall. "You were present in this chamber when catastrophic systems failure threatened the lives of everyone assembled. You recognized the danger through professional expertise. You provided immediate warning that enabled evacuation. You performed repairs under extreme time pressure that restored safety and prevented casualties." She descended from the throne platform, even more unprecedented, and approached David directly. "Your actions demonstrated that worth is not measured by rank or title, but by competence and willingness to act decisively when action is required. You were a worker standing at the edge of the chamber. But when crisis demanded, you became the most essential person present." Queen Isaveth raised her hand and pointed at David. The same gesture she'd used during the crisis, the one that had made guards step aside and given him authority to do whatever was necessary. "By my authority as Queen of the Thessari Empire, you are hereby appointed Chief Systems Engineer for all royal facilities. You will have staff, resources, and authority to ensure that what nearly occurred never happens again. You will report directly to my office. Your recommendations regarding safety and systems maintenance will carry the weight of royal priority." David was too stunned to respond with anything other than an automatic bow. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I'm just a maintenance engineer. I don't have the administrative experience to manage. You have the competence to recognize crisis and the courage to act decisively when every instinct of protocol says to wait for proper channels." Queen Isaveth interrupted. "Those qualities are worth more than administrative experience, which can be learned and delegated. You will accept this position because you have already demonstrated you are the right person for it." She looked around at the assembled court. "Let it be recorded that true value is sometimes found in unexpected places, that those who work with their hands and knowledge can be as essential, more essential, than those who govern with authority and tradition." Engineer Torres was overlooked, standing at the edge of this chamber, until crisis revealed his worth. Let us not make the habit of overlooking such worth simply because it doesn't come wrapped in appropriate rank or noble lineage. The court acknowledged the appointment with formal responses required by Thessari protocol. David became, in that moment, something he'd never expected. Not just a worker, but someone of genuine authority and consequence in the Thessari Empire. That evening, after the formalities, Queen Isaveth requested private meeting with David in chambers far from the formal throne room. "You're wondering why I elevated you so dramatically," she said without preamble. "The thought had crossed my mind, Your Majesty," David admitted. "I did my job. I prevented a disaster. That's what maintenance engineers are supposed to do." "You did far more than your job," the Queen corrected. "When you ran toward the throne shouting warnings, you made a choice. You chose immediate action over proper procedure. You chose to risk your position and reputation to ensure lives were saved. That is not merely doing one's job. That is exercising judgment and courage that many nobles in my court lack." She settled into a less formal posture. "I pointed at you during the crisis. Do you understand the significance of that gesture in Thessari culture?" "I know it gave me authority," David said. The guard stepped aside immediately. "It gave you my authority," Isaveth corrected. "When a Thessari queen points directly at someone and issues command, that person becomes extension of royal will. Their actions carry the weight of the throne itself. It is gesture reserved for moments when protocol must be overridden by necessity." She looked at him seriously. "I pointed at you because in that moment I recognized something essential. You knew what needed to be done. You had the competence to do it. And you had already demonstrated the courage to act by running toward the throne despite knowing guards would stop you. Those three qualities, knowledge, competence, courage, made you the right person to trust with everyone's lives. I was just the person who happened to notice the problem," David protested. "You were the person with expertise to recognize a problem that others missed, judgment to assess the urgency accurately, and courage to ensure the warning was heard despite protocol barriers," the Queen replied. "That combination of qualities is rare. It deserves recognition beyond a simple thank you. She paused. The appointment I gave you today, Chief Systems Engineer, is not ceremonial. It comes with genuine authority and responsibility. You will reform how maintenance and safety systems are managed across all royal facilities. You will have resources to implement proper oversight and prevent future failures. You will report directly to me, because I want someone who prioritizes safety over politics making those decisions. Why trust me with this? David asked. You barely know me. I know what matters, Isaveth replied. I know you ran toward danger to warn others. I know you performed impossible repairs under impossible time constraints. I know you prioritized lives over your own career concerns. Those actions tell me more about your character than years of formal interaction would reveal. She stood, signaling the meeting was concluding. You were at the edge of the chamber, David Torres, just a worker maintaining systems. But when crisis revealed who you truly were, someone competent and courageous and willing to act, I pointed at you and elevated you to where your worth could be properly utilized. I won't let you down, Your Majesty, David said. I know you won't, the Queen replied, because you've already proven what you are when the stakes are highest. The rest is simply applying that same dedication to preventing crises rather than resolving them. Years later, when David had transformed safety protocols across the entire Thessari royal infrastructure, when his reforms had prevented dozens of potential disasters, when he'd trained hundreds of engineers in the kind of proactive maintenance that saved lives, he would reflect on the day everything changed. The day he'd been just a worker at the edge of the chamber. The day a queen had pointed at him and guards had stepped aside. The day competence and courage had been recognized and elevated above rank and protocol. He'd run toward the throne shouting warnings. She'd pointed at him and given him authority. And from that moment, he'd become someone of consequence, not because of noble birth or political connections, but because crisis had revealed worth that had been overlooked until it became essential. The pointing gesture that made guards step aside. The recognition that transformed a worker into an authority. The understanding that true value isn't measured by titles, but by competence demonstrated when it matters most.